In the heart of a blizzard, a battle-scarred veteran heard his canine barking like never before. He opened the door and froze. A barefoot little girl stood there, crying, clutching two dying babies in her arms. Her voice cracked through the storm. They said, "We made Mommy die." But what the dog uncovered next shattered everything he thought he had left behind. As you listen, we'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from today? Make sure to subscribe for more stories that speak to the heart. Now, let's begin. Late January in Winter Hollow. Snow had fallen for days, covering the forest and burying the narrow mountain road. The wind howled through the trees, rattling the old tin roof of a cabin hidden deep in the woods. Inside, a fire cracked softly, throwing shadows on the walls. Jack Bennett sat motionless in his worn armchair, staring into the flames. 45 years old, though his face looked older, etched deep with grief and the weary lines of war. His jaw was square, hardened, with a silver-streaked beard growing unevenly over sunken cheeks. Short, peppered hair lay messily atop his head, and his pale blue eyes often stared past the present moment. His body was still lean and strong, the muscle of a soldier never truly fading, but his shoulders slumped now with a weight that never eased. He hadn't spoken to another soul in over a month, not since he last went down to town for supplies. Since then, the mountain had been enough. Him, the snow, the silence, and Bruno. Bruno lay by the fire, a 5-year-old German shepherd with thick black and brown fur, strong legs, and a steady gaze that rarely wavered from his human. Unlike most dogs, Bruno did not bark needlessly. He was trained for war, like Jack, once a K-9 military unit that served together in Afghanistan. Bruno had a scar along his left hind leg, a reminder of a roadside bomb they barely survived. Since the war ended, and since the accident, Bruno had become more than a companion. He was Jack's last connection to a world he no longer trusted. That accident. Jack's hand twitched slightly. It had been nearly 2 years, but the memory was a film on loop behind his eyes. A rainy night. A driver who had one drink too many. A smashed family car. And the last time he saw his wife, Megan, and his daughter, Annie, 10 years old and singing out of tune in the back seat. After the funeral, Jack fled here to the mountain. The only thing he brought with him was Bruno and a box of things he couldn't throw away. In this silence, he hoped to forget, or at least disappear. He hadn't decided which yet. The wind rattled the cabin again. Jack stood slowly to throw another log into the fire when Bruno suddenly lifted his head, ears pricked. A low growl rumbled in his throat. Jack froze, eyes narrowing. Bruno only growled when something was wrong. The dog stood now, muscles taut, nose pointed toward the door. Then, without warning, he barked, a single deep warning, and sprinted to the entryway. "What is it, boy?" Jack whispered. Bruno scratched at the door, growling louder now. Jack moved quickly, grabbed his coat and flashlight, and slung the old rifle over his back more out of habit than need. When he opened the door, a blast of icy air punched into the room. The snow outside was knee-deep. Visibility was almost nothing, just thick curtains of white swirling across the trees. "Bruno!" he called. But Bruno was already bounding into the snow, nose low, moving fast down the ridge path. Jack cursed softly, then followed, boots crunching through the snow, flashlight flicking between shadows. The cold bit into his skin, sharp and merciless. His breath came out in steam, but Bruno's barks pulled him forward like a lifeline. Then he saw it. Near the base of a tree, where the snow had been disturbed into a small crater, Bruno stood motionless, tail stiff. Jack approached slowly, and his heart dropped. There, half buried in the snow, was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 7. She was curled protectively around something, 2 small bundles wrapped in a torn fleece blanket. Her long, dark hair was matted with ice, and her bare feet were red and raw. Her face, pale with blue-tinged lips, stared up at Jack as he knelt. Hey, it's okay," Jack murmured, pulling his coat off and draping it over her shaking body. The girl didn't move, but her cracked lips parted, and a broken whisper came out. "Please, they're hurting us. Mommy's gone." Jack felt something sharp twist in his chest. "Who's hurting you?" he asked gently. But she didn't answer. She was too weak, slipping between consciousness and cold. He looked down at the bundles. Twin babies, he realized. A boy and a girl. Newborns maybe a few weeks old, their faces flushed and damp with sweat. The girl's little arms were trembling as she tried to hold them tighter. Jack moved fast. He wrapped all three children in his coat, scooped them up carefully, and turned back to the cabin. Bruno trotted beside him, alert but silent. Inside, Jack laid them down by the fire, grabbing every dry blanket he had. He checked the babies first. Their skin was burning hot, but their fingertips were purple. Fever and frostbite, an unthinkable combination. He ran to the kitchen, filled a bowl with warm water, and grabbed a clean cloth. One by one, he wiped their foreheads, whispering soft, steady words he hadn't spoken in years. The girl, still curled protectively around them, watched him with glassy eyes. He kneeled beside her. "What's your name, sweetheart?" he asked. "Ellie," she whispered. "They're Ben and Lila." "Okay, Ellie. I'm Jack. You're safe now. Stay close to the fire." She nodded faintly. Bruno came and lay beside her without command, his large body shielding her from the cold creeping in through the cabin walls. Jack stood, wiped a hand over his face, and exhaled. This was no accident. No lost hikers, no wandering child. These children had been left, abandoned or worse, and someone didn't want them found. The fire had burned low, but the heat in the cabin had finally pushed the ice back from the children's skin. Jack had turned every blanket, coat, and towel he owned into a makeshift nest by the hearth. And now he crouched beside it, watching the tiniest rise and fall of three small chests. Ben, Lila, and Ellie. Bruno lay at their side like a shadow, his head resting on crossed paws, ears perked. He didn't sleep. He never did when danger felt near. Outside, the wind pressed against the wooden walls like a restless beast trying to find its way in. Jack gently wrung out another cloth in lukewarm water and placed it across Ben's forehead. The boy was burning up, breath fast and shallow, with lips still tinged blue. His twin sister Lila was no better. Eyes closed tight, her tiny fists clenched beneath the blanket. Jack had found an old vial of infant fever medicine in his emergency kit, left over from a hiker's child who'd fallen sick years ago. He'd given them both a few drops, but he knew it wasn't enough. Ellie stirred. Her eyelids fluttered open as if pulled upward by exhaustion. She looked straight at Jack, but didn't flinch. Her eyes, a shade of grayish green like the fog above pine treetops, were filled with something more than fear. They held exhaustion, distrust, survival. "You're safe now," Jack said softly, his voice rough but steady. "I'm Jack. That's Bruno." Ellie sat up slightly, careful not to jostle the babies. Her hair was long, dark, tangled, and matted with ice. Her skin was pale with a bluish tint at the lips and ears. She pulled the blanket tighter around the twins, then looked at him again. "Where are we?" "My cabin, top of the ridge," Jack said. "How long have you been out in that storm?" She didn't answer right away. Then, with a voice as soft as snowfall, she said, "I don't know. We walked until my feet stopped feeling anything." Jack noticed then, her feet were still bare under the blanket, raw and cracked. He got up, found a pair of wool socks, and wrapped them around her small feet gently. Ellie didn't resist. She was watching him now, not like a child watching a stranger, but like a soldier assessing whether he was a threat. "Can I ask your name?" "Ellie," she whispered. "I'm 7. Ben and Lila are just babies. They're my brother and sister." Jack paused. "Where's your mother?" Ellie's face hardened in an instant. She looked down at the babies, then out the window as if she could still see the past. "She's dead. Mommy died last week. We buried her in the snow." Jack felt his stomach drop. "How?" "She fell. Down the stairs. That's what Derek said. But she didn't fall. I know she didn't." Jack said nothing. His hands tightened unconsciously on the edge of the chair. "Derek's our stepdad," Ellie continued. "He never liked us. After Mommy died, he stopped feeding Ben and Lila. He locked the fridge. Then he left for work and said, if I told anyone, he'd make sure we disappeared too." She stopped, looking at Jack with sharp intensity. "I didn't know where to go," she said. "But before Mommy died, she gave me something and said, if anything happened, find someone who keeps their promises." Jack's throat caught. Those words, it had been years since he heard them, But they were the same words his wife once whispered to their daughter, before the accident. "What did your mom give you?" he asked. Ellie slowly reached into the blanket, pulled out a damp, crumpled photograph, faded, curled at the edges. It showed a woman and 3 children sitting on a park bench. Taped behind it was a small black USB. Jack reached for the photo first. The woman must have been Sarah, tall and slender, with long auburn hair tucked behind her ears. Her face was gentle, almost soft, but there was an unmistakable tension in her shoulders even in the photo. Her skin was fair, with a few freckles across her nose. In the picture, she was holding one of the babies while Ellie leaned into her side, smiling with the gap-toothed confidence of someone who hadn't yet learned fear. Jack turned the photo over in his hand. The USB was taped firmly, wrapped in waterproof plastic. He didn't touch it yet. His hands had started to shake. "Is that your mom?" Ellie nodded. Her name was Sarah. She was kind, but always tired. She used to cry in the bathroom when she thought we couldn't hear. Jack nodded, not trusting himself to speak. The photo was from another world, a world where this family had once had hope. He placed it gently on the table and looked back at Ellie. "I'll keep you safe," he said. "All of you." Ellie just blinked. "Do you promise?" He hesitated, but only for a second. "Yes." Bruno stirred. He rose and walked over to Jack's side, giving Ellie a brief nudge with his nose. She reached out, her small hand pressing against the dog's chest. For the first time, her eyes softened. "He's warm." "He's better than most people I know," Jack replied. He stood and turned to the small wooden cabinet in the corner. From it, he pulled out an old heating pad, a backup battery, and a dusty radio receiver. He plugged the pad in first and laid it under the babies, careful not to overheat it. Then he sat beside the radio, fiddling with the knobs. No signal. The storm was still too thick. He would need help. Medicine, supplies, something stronger than expired fever drops and melted snow. But who could he trust? One name came to mind. Celia Monroe. She'd been a field medic during his last tour, calm, blunt, fiercely intelligent. She was in her late 40s now, with short blonde hair and sharp green eyes that never missed a thing. After leaving the military, she'd moved to a small clinic 2 towns over. He hadn't spoken to her in 3 years. Jack scribbled a note on the back of an old grocery receipt. "Watch the kids," he said to Bruno, as if the dog could read his mind. Ellie looked worried. "Where are you going?" "Just down the ridge. There's a spot with signal. I need to call someone who can help." Ellie sat quietly, holding Lila tighter. "Will you come back?" Jack looked her straight in the eye. "I will." He grabbed his coat, rifle, and the USB. Then he stepped out into the night again, snow swirling like ghosts around him. He didn't know what secrets were hidden inside that little device, but whatever they were, he was about to find out. The snow had quieted. Outside, the sky turned a strange steel gray as dawn threatened to rise, though the sun would not pierce through the dense cloud cover for hours. Jack trudged back up the ridge, boots soaked, fingers stiff from cold, but his mind sharper than it had been in months. He held the USB drive in one gloved hand, the plastic casing slightly cracked but still intact. Every step he took back to the cabin felt heavier, not from the snow, but from the weight of what might be hidden inside. Inside the cabin, the air was warm but tense. Bruno met him at the door, tail low, eyes watchful. The dog stepped aside only when Jack whispered, "It's me." Ellie sat by the fire, rocking Lila gently in her arms, while Ben lay curled up beside her. The girl looked up at him. No smile, just a silent question in her eyes. "Did you find someone? Did you keep your promise?" "I couldn't get a call through," Jack said quietly, "but I'll keep trying." He paused. "And I'm going to check what's on that USB." He turned toward the far end of the cabin, where an old military-issued laptop sat on a narrow desk. The machine was a relic, thick and dented, with keys that stuck, and a screen that flickered like candlelight. It had no internet, but its battery was charged. Jack booted it up, sat down, and inserted the USB. Ellie watched from the corner, her thin frame barely visible beneath layers of mismatched blankets. She said nothing, just tightened her grip on the twins. The folder on the USB was simple. One file, no password. Labeled only, "If anything happens." Jack clicked. The screen turned black for a few seconds, then a video began to play. A woman appeared, sitting in a dim room with pale green walls and a narrow window behind her. Her name was no longer a mystery. This was Sarah. Even in poor resolution, her features were striking. Sarah had an angular face, hollowed from stress or illness, with auburn hair pulled back tightly in a bun. Her skin, fair and freckled, looked almost translucent in the light. Her eyes were dark green, the same shape as Ellie's, but lacking the spark. Instead, they were full of fear, and something else. Resolve. "Hi, Ellie," she began, her voice raspy. "If you're watching this, then something happened. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you." Jack leaned in, his jaw clenched. "I tried. I fought as long as I could, but Derek and Linda, they know the system. They forged papers, said I was unfit to be a mother, said I was mentally unstable. They made me sign custody agreements when I was too weak to argue." She swallowed hard, tears running down her cheek. "They want your inheritance, the one from your grandfather. That trust account I never touched. They'll lie to everyone to get it. Please, Ellie, don't trust them. If anything happens to me, find someone good, someone who still keeps their promises." She paused, her lips trembling. "I don't know where that someone is, but I hope they find you first." The video froze for a moment, then ended. Silence filled the cabin. Jack sat back, hands curled into fists. The room seemed smaller now, like the walls had moved in to hold the truth with him. Across the room, Ellie was motionless, staring into the fire. "They told me," she whispered finally, "if I said anything, they'd take Ben away forever. They'd separate us, sell our house, send us somewhere else. I didn't know what to do." Jack stood slowly and crossed the room. He crouched beside her and placed a hand on her shoulder. Her small body shuddered once, but she didn't pull away. "They won't hurt you anymore," he said firmly. "Not on my watch." Ellie looked up at him, her eyes glistening. "Do you believe her?" "I do." He stood again and walked to the desk, unplugging the USB, and placing it into a tin box he slid under the floorboards. A hiding spot he hadn't used since the day he buried his service pistol and dog tags, swearing never to need them again. Now, he wasn't so sure. Later that morning, as the fire grew lower and Bruno dozed lightly near the door, Jack opened an old journal, his field notes from years ago. He found a torn page with a contact written in faded ink. Linda Wexley, listed as a temporary guardian in a case he once reviewed during a veteran outreach program. It couldn't be a coincidence. He remembered her vaguely. A woman in her early 40s, sharp features, always immaculately dressed in designer coats and boots, blonde hair tied up in a clipped bun, and makeup like a porcelain doll. But her eyes had a kind of calculated detachment. At the time, Jack had thought it was just legalese and protocol. Now it felt sinister. She'd worked as a licensed guardian in 2 counties and had a reputation for taking on problem children. She was praised for her efficiency, even received awards. But Jack also recalled whispers. Stories of kids moved across state lines, trusts accessed early, funds misused. Nothing proven. Until now. He turned back to Ellie. "Do you know a woman named Linda?" Ellie nodded slowly. "She came after Mommy went to the hospital, said she was there to help. But she only talked to Derek. She never looked at us, never smiled. I think she hated kids." Jack exhaled. His instincts weren't wrong. He knelt beside Bruno, scratched behind the dog's ears. "We've got a storm to fight, old friend." Bruno raised his head, alert. As the day drew on, Jack began making preparations. He gathered what little supplies they had, wrote a list of essentials, and began considering how to reach town undetected. He'd need help, not just from Celia, but maybe from someone in law enforcement who wasn't bought. And first, he'd need to find a way to get this USB into safe hands. The next morning, the storm had thinned to a hush, leaving behind a brittle stillness that wrapped the mountain like glass. The trees stood silent, weighted with snow. Jack rose before the light had fully broken, slipping quietly out of the cabin while the children still slept. Ellie had curled herself protectively around the twins, and Bruno, ever vigilant, lay between her and the door, as if daring the world to try anything. Jack trudged through the knee-deep snow toward the ridge's edge, where a cluster of tall evergreens opened to a small clearing. It was the only spot within 2 miles where he could get even a flicker of cell reception. His breath misted in the cold as he climbed the final hill, pausing beneath the frost-covered limbs of an old spruce. He pulled out the satellite phone he'd buried in the bottom of his field bag years ago. The screen cracked to life with a green signal bar. Weak, but enough. He dialed a number he hadn't used in nearly 4 years. "Celia Monroe," answered a steady, clear voice. "Who is this?" Jack exhaled slowly. "It's Jack. Jack Bennett." There was a pause, then a sharp inhale. "Jack, I thought you dropped off the grid." "I did. What's wrong?" "I need your help." That was all it took. Dr. Celia Monroe arrived just after noon in a battered gray pickup, its tires chained and engine wheezing from the climb. She was in her late 40s, short but strong, with pale skin and shoulder-length blonde hair tied in a no-nonsense ponytail. Her eyes were green and alert, the kind that missed nothing. Though the lines around her eyes had deepened since they last met, there was still the iron calm Jack remembered from their deployment years, when Celia had patched up soldiers with one hand and yelled orders with the other. She stepped out of the truck in a thick navy parka, snow-dusted medical bag slung across her back. "Where are they?" Jack led her inside without a word. As soon as she entered, Celia crouched beside the fire and began assessing the twins. She moved quickly and silently, checking pulses, measuring breaths, lifting eyelids, and unrolling a set of small vials from a thermal pouch. "They're dehydrated and febrile, but the worst danger's past," she said after 10 minutes. "Another day in that cold, though, and it would have been over." She glanced toward Ellie, who watched her warily. Celia offered a small smile. "You must be the big sister." Ellie nodded, but said nothing. "I'm Celia," she said gently. "I'm a doctor. Your brother and sister are lucky to have you." Ellie looked down at Ben, then whispered, "They're all I have." Jack returned from the back room carrying a jug of melted snow water. He handed it to Celia, who began mixing in electrolyte powder. "What's going on, Jack?" she asked under her breath. "These kids didn't just wander out here." Jack showed her the USB, the photo, and relayed everything he'd seen and heard, including Sarah's video. When he finished, Celia leaned back against the wall, crossing her arms. "Linda Wexley," she muttered. "She came up in a few old whistleblower cases. Guardianship fraud, if I remember right. Nothing ever stuck. She knows how to cover her tracks." "Well, we've got a piece of them now. I'll help however I can," Celia said. "But you need to know, if someone's looking for these kids, they'll be coming fast, especially if Wexley's involved." Jack nodded. "That's why I need you here." Celia didn't hesitate. "Then I'm staying." As the afternoon wore on, Jack left briefly to chop more firewood. The air had warmed just enough to make the snow slick. He filled 2 buckets and began carrying them from the stream back to the cabin. Bruno had followed him, as usual, sniffing at every tree trunk, ears twitching with alertness. That's when the dog froze. "Bruno?" Jack stopped, squinting in the dappled light through the trees. The shepherd took a slow, deliberate step toward a patch of snow near the edge of the trail and began to growl low in his throat. Jack stepped closer and saw it. A footprint. No, not one, several. Deep, wide, and fresh. Too large for Ellie. Not Jack's boots, and not Celia's. Jack's hand moved automatically to the knife tucked at his belt. He crouched and studied the tracks. There were at least 3 sets. Heavy boots, treaded soles. Not hikers, military or tactical. They had come up the ridge from the other side, but more unsettling was the direction. They circled the cabin, watched, then left. Jack motioned Bruno closer. The dog sniffed, then turned his head toward the west edge of the woods. Jack followed the direction with his eyes. Beyond that tree line, a dirt road, covered in snow, but still accessible to anyone who knew the terrain. They were being watched. Back at the cabin, Jack carefully reviewed the security camera he had installed months ago, more for wildlife than anything else. But the battery had held, and the footage was clear. At dawn, a black SUV had appeared briefly in the distance, parked along the tree line for nearly 15 minutes. The windows were tinted. No plates. Then it backed away and disappeared into the white. Jack looked at Celia, who was kneeling beside Lila, adjusting a heat wrap. "We've got company," he said. She didn't even blink. "How soon?" "Maybe tonight, maybe sooner. Then we don't wait." Celia stood, walked to her truck, and pulled out another duffel bag filled with gear. Thermal blankets, a compact IV kit, emergency rations. We prepped for evacuation, she said, just in case. That night, as the wind picked up again and snow whispered against the windows, Jack sat with his rifle across his knees. Bruno curled at his feet. Ellie sat across from him, Ben and Lila asleep in her arms. The fire crackled. And outside, deep in the woods, something moved. The snow was falling again, light and whisper soft, but it brought with it an eerie stillness that crawled under the skin. Inside the cabin, the fire cracked gently, while Celia changed Ben's IV drip and checked Lila's fever. Ellie sat nearby with wide, alert eyes, holding her baby sister close. Bruno paced the perimeter of the cabin, his movements slow but methodical, the tip of his nose twitching at every gust of wind against the wood. Jack stood by the narrow window, staring out toward the tree line. His gut had gone tight the moment he saw those boot prints, and that feeling hadn't loosened since. He'd been in too many ambushes not to recognize the buildup. He glanced at Celia. "We won't get a second warning." Celia nodded. She had tied her hair back in a tighter knot, and now wore her heavy tactical jacket over a black thermal shirt and jeans tucked into snow boots. "You think it's Wexley?" "I'd bet my rifle it is. She's not sending lawyers, she's sending muscle." The knock came at 10:17 a.m. Sharp. 3 taps. A pause. Then another 2. Slower, like punctuation. Jack's hand went immediately to his sidearm. Bruno stood frozen, hackles raised, a deep rumble forming in his chest. "Mr. Bennett?" A man called from outside, voice practiced and calm. "This is Officer Strickland with Child Services. We're here with Miss Wexley for a welfare check." Jack didn't move. Another voice followed, this one smooth, professional, female. "Mr. Bennett, we have paperwork from the county authorizing us to evaluate the safety of the children inside your home. Please open the door, or we will be forced to request assistance." Celia glanced at Jack. "They didn't announce themselves coming up. That's not protocol." "I know." Jack stepped closer to the door, his voice firm but steady. "This is private property. You'll need to return with a real sheriff, a badge number, and a signed court order." There was a pause. Then the woman's voice turned colder. "You're interfering with a legal investigation, Mr. Bennett." Jack didn't answer. Bruno's growl intensified. Without warning, the door exploded inward. 2 men surged in, dressed in dark jackets with fake badges clipped to their belts. Both were large, mid-30s, with military builds. One had a shaved head. The other wore a short-cropped beard, his face angular and scarred. The bearded one lunged first, but Bruno was faster, launching forward with a bark that echoed like thunder, slamming into his chest and knocking him back into the doorframe. Jack moved on instinct. A left hook dropped the second man to his knees, where Celia quickly swept his legs and delivered a sharp blow with a metal flashlight. He hit the floor with a grunt. But there was a third figure. Linda Wexley stepped calmly into the room as if she'd been invited. She was in her early 40s, tall and thin, with perfect posture, platinum blonde hair styled in a sleek bob under a cream-colored wool hat. Her coat was expensive, cashmere and pearl buttons, and her gloves matched flawlessly. There was no warmth in her eyes, only clinical disdain. She looked around with a slow gaze and fixed her stare on Ellie. "There she is," she said coolly, "the little liar." Jack stepped between them. "Get out!" Linda raised a gloved hand, and her red-painted lips curled slightly. "Those children are in danger, Mr. Bennett. You are harboring minors without legal authority, and you just assaulted 2 officers of the state. You don't have jurisdiction," Celia snapped. "And they're not officers. Neither of them had badges, let alone warrants." Linda's eyes flicked toward her men, both now groaning on the ground. "I warned you," she muttered. In the corner, Ellie had backed up into the stone hearth, holding Lila tight. One of the men, bruised but not down, was crawling toward her. Ellie glanced at the pot of boiling water Celia had been using to sterilize Ben's bottles. Her hand shook as she reached for it. The man lunged. She screamed and hurled the water. The scalding liquid splashed across the man's face and neck. He howled in agony, collapsing backward and clutching at his blistering skin. Celia grabbed Ellie and pulled her behind her. Bruno, blood on his muzzle, growled low and advanced again as the man writhed. Linda didn't flinch. "This won't end well for you," she said. Jack was already moving. He grabbed Ellie's hand, nodded at Celia, and swept the children toward the bookshelf in the corner. Behind it, a false panel, a stairwell, a tunnel. Built during his off-grid prep years and refined from old military blueprints, it led 50 yards through the rock and snow to a secondary shelter, one he'd always hoped never to use. Celia carried Ben. Jack took Lila and the USB drive. Bruno led the way, his steps urgent but silent. They descended quickly, closing the panel behind them. Above, they could still hear the men yelling, one of them firing a shot into the air in frustration. Linda's voice remained even. "Find them, now." The tunnel was dark, cold, and narrow, lit only by the dim LED Jack had mounted years ago. It curved underground before emerging through a camouflaged door near a small outcropping of rocks halfway down the ridge. The group stumbled into the open air. Snow bit at their faces. Bruno barked once, then fell silent again. Jack looked back at Ellie, who was shivering but alert. She hadn't cried once. "Are you okay?" he asked. She nodded slowly. "I knew she'd come." Jack didn't ask how. They moved together into the trees, the entrance behind them disappearing into white. The trees stood like silent guards as Jack led the group through the thinning forest. Snow flurried in lazy spirals around them, muffling their footfalls as they followed a narrow trail obscured by the storm. Bruno was ahead, his dark fur dusted white, nose low to the ground. His movements were precise, methodical, just as they'd been in Afghanistan. But now, instead of IEDs or hidden combatants, the threat was human greed wrapped in legal language and false badges. Celia trailed close behind Jack, her breath ragged but steady as she carried the medical pack on her shoulder and cradled Ben in her arms. Jack held Lila, whose fever had broken slightly, but whose body remained weak and limp. Ellie kept pace just behind Bruno, arms clutching her coat tight around her chest. She didn't cry, not once, but Jack saw the weight in her eyes, more than any child should carry. They reached the base of a ridge, where the trees thickened around a long-forgotten logging trail. Ahead, a structure loomed, a small wooden cabin, its shingles moss-covered and its windows boarded from within. The snow had buried most of its frame, but Jack recognized the shape. So did Celia. She stepped forward and rested a hand on the door frame. "Didn't think I'd ever see this place again." Celia had used this site during a 6-month emergency deployment years ago, patching up wounded soldiers and displaced civilians in a temporary field clinic. After the war, she had bought the land for $1 from the state, just enough to retain access, not enough for it to show up in any useful record. Jack pushed open the door. Inside, the air was stale but dry. The floor creaked beneath their feet. Dust floated like snowflakes through a slant of gray light from a broken ceiling board. A rusted wood stove sat in the corner beside a wooden table, still stained from iodine and blood. They moved quickly. Celia began setting up makeshift bedding near the stove, while Jack started a fire using old birch bark and a handful of dry logs he had stacked here years ago. Bruno paced the walls, sniffing for danger, then curled near the door. Ellie sat silently, legs crossed on a faded wool rug, both arms wrapped around a small blue pouch she had worn around her neck. Jack noticed it earlier but hadn't asked. Now, her fingers fumbled with the cord, and she looked up. "My mom gave me this," she said. "She said never to take it off." Jack crouched beside her. "Can I see?" Ellie hesitated, then slowly opened the pouch. Inside, wrapped in a piece of soft cloth, was a silver locket, oval, worn, and engraved with delicate vines. It looked old. She opened it to reveal 2 tiny photos. One of a young Sarah holding a newborn Ellie, the other of Sarah and a man, tall, dark-haired, his arm protectively around her. But the locket was heavier than it looked. "There's something else," Ellie whispered. She turned it over, ran her fingers along the back edge. With a soft click, the metal popped open to reveal a hidden compartment. Inside was a second USB drive. Jack took it carefully, then looked at Celia. "We need to see what's on this." They powered up the laptop, the same battered military model Jack had carried from the cabin. The screen flickered to life. Jack inserted the drive. Several files appeared, some encrypted, others not. One folder labeled Asset Transfers contained scanned documents, wiring instructions, notarized agreements, and emails between Linda Wexley and an offshore legal firm. Jack clicked through page after page of data linking Sarah's trust, meant for her children, to a network of shell companies. Linda had moved nearly $600,000 across multiple accounts in less than 8 months. The transfers were clean, masked behind legal guardianship orders and medical declarations of incompetency. "This isn't just theft," Celia muttered. "It's a full-blown operation." Another folder labeled Children included names, ages, and case numbers. Some children had no photos, others had brief annotations. Adopted by affiliated family, or asset access approved, guardianship confirmed. Jack scrolled slowly. Ellie's name was there, along with Ben and Lila. Celia stood frozen, her fingers clenched around the edge of the table. "They're running a racket. Legal abductions masked as guardianship." Jack leaned back. This is why Sarah died." Ellie sat still, her voice soft. "She said Linda never looked at us like people. Just like problems." Suddenly the truth of it all sat like lead in the room. They weren't just hiding from one corrupt woman. They had stumbled into the heart of something larger, a machine that fed on forgotten children, backed by signed affidavits and forged documents. Bruno barked once, sharp. Jack grabbed the laptop and closed it. "Someone's nearby!" They moved fast. Jack lifted a wooden panel beneath the old clinic's supply shelf, revealing a crawl space packed with crates and medical gear. They climbed down, one by one, and closed the hatch above. From the darkness, they heard footsteps outside. Muffled voices. A man's voice, gravelly, angry, barked orders, then silence. Bruno growled low in his throat, but Jack placed a hand on the dog's neck. They waited. After 10 long minutes, the footsteps retreated. When they finally emerged, the snow outside was undisturbed, but a fresh cigarette butt lay smoldering near the door. "They know we're close," Celia said. Jack opened the laptop again and copied the data onto 2 separate drives. "We move again at dawn. But now we know the truth. And we're not just running anymore." The blizzard broke at dawn, leaving the forest silent and still. A thick blanket of snow coated every branch, every rooftop, as if trying to cover the scars of the night before. Inside the field shelter, Jack watched the sun filter through frost-stained glass while Ellie slept with Lila curled against her chest. Celia sat by the stove, rewrapping Bruno's paw where a cut had reopened during their escape. The dog didn't flinch. His dark eyes remained fixed on the door. Jack had made his decision before sunrise. They could not hide any longer. He walked to the corner of the shelter and pulled out a shortwave radio from an insulated case beneath the floor. Its exterior was scratched and dented, the metal cool to the touch. He flipped the switches, adjusted the dials, and broadcast a single message. "This is Jack Bennett, retired U.S. Army. I need to speak with Officer Miles Grant. Urgent matter concerning child endangerment, legal fraud, and potential homicide. I have evidence." They waited for over 2 hours. Then came the reply, clear and low, through the static. "This is Officer Grant. I'm listening." Officer Miles Grant arrived by snowplow later that day. At 51, he was tall and broad-shouldered, with short silver hair and a neatly trimmed beard. His eyes were sharp, the kind that had seen too much to be easily surprised. Grant wore a heavy black overcoat with the badge of Winter Hollow pinned on the left chest. He moved with quiet authority, flanked by 2 deputies and a county prosecutor named Dana Cross, a wiry woman in her 40s with intelligent eyes and an iron jaw. Grant shook Jack's hand firmly, then nodded at Celia. "I remember you," he said. "Medical tent, 2013, Afghanistan. You saved my sergeant's leg." Celia offered a faint smile. "Small world." Inside the cabin, Jack laid out the USB drives, the printed documents, and the photo of Sarah. He walked them through everything. How Ellie had arrived with the twins, the fake welfare check, the forged custody papers, the hidden accounts. Celia added medical testimony and provided a sworn statement that the children had shown signs of neglect and intentional medical deprivation. Dana Cross reviewed the files in silence. She had an angular face framed by tight curls of dark brown hair. She was methodical, scanning each line like someone who had built a career tearing through lies. When she reached the folder titled Children, she looked up. "We've got something here. This is organized crime hidden behind family court. You said the mother suspected she would be killed?" Jack nodded. "Her name was Sarah Langston. That video was her last warning." Dana turned to Officer Grant. "We need a judge, now." The emergency hearing was held in the old town hall 3 days later. Snow still blanketed the sidewalks, and police had cordoned off the perimeter. Inside, The wood-paneled room was filled with tension. Reporters weren't allowed in yet, but word had spread. An ex-soldier had rescued 3 children from a conspiracy tied to a high-profile guardian. Linda Wexley entered the courtroom in a navy trench coat, her platinum blonde hair pinned up in a perfect twist. Her expression was a blend of annoyance and false composure. She was flanked by 2 attorneys in tailored gray suits. One of them, Gerald Tolman, was known in the region for defending high-net-worth clients. He had a polished face and a smug confidence, but even he seemed slightly on edge. Across the aisle, Jack sat with Ellie beside him. She wore a pale gray sweater Celia had knit overnight and held Bruno's leash in her lap. The dog sat upright beside her, still as stone, his fur brushed and cleaned for court. Celia stood behind them, arms crossed. Judge Avery Holt presided, a woman in her early 60s with short white hair and a reputation for fairness. She adjusted her glasses as she read through the first few files. Dana Cross stepped forward to begin. She spoke calmly, with precision, detailing the network of false guardianships, forged medical reports, and illegal transfers of minors' inheritance into Linda Wexley's offshore accounts. The courtroom was silent except for the shuffle of paper and the clicking of the judge's pen. Then came the video. Jack connected his laptop to the overhead monitor. Sarah's face filled the screen, pale, tired, but clear. Her voice echoed through the room. They said I was unfit, but I was just sick. They made me sign things I didn't understand. If anything happens, find someone who still keeps their promises. Judge Holt's jaw tightened. She looked to Linda. Do you wish to respond to this? Linda's attorney stood, attempting to object, but Dana cut him off with the second USB, this time showing the money trails, wire transfers, guardian signatures, case numbers, and names, Ellie's name, Ben's, Lila's. A collective murmur filled the courtroom. Then Ellie stood. Her voice was soft but clear. She called us burdens. She said my mommy was crazy and didn't deserve us. She said if I didn't stay quiet, they'd take Ben away, and I'd never see them again. Tears filled her eyes, but she didn't wipe them. She lied to everybody. Linda's mask slipped. Her eyes narrowed. You little... Miss Wexley, the judge snapped. Sit down. The courtroom went still. Judge Holt turned to Officer Grant. Is there confirmation of foul play in Sarah Langston's death? He nodded grimly. Brake lines were deliberately cut. Corrosion was staged. A forensic team confirmed it last night. There was a beat of heavy silence. Then I have no hesitation, the judge said. Linda Wexley, you are hereby remanded into custody on charges of fraud, child endangerment, conspiracy to commit homicide, and exploitation of minors. Bail is denied. Linda's scream echoed through the room as 2 deputies moved to cuff her. Across the aisle, Derek Langston, Sarah's former husband and biological father of the twins, sat motionless, pale, sweating, his thinning dark hair clinging to his forehead. He had been brought in for questioning the night before and now sat awaiting his turn. Mr. Langston, Dana said, stepping forward, you were aware of the documents, the transfers. Were you complicit in signing away your children's rights? Derek didn't speak at first. His jaw trembled. I didn't know they'd kill her. I thought, Linda said it was legal. She said it was clean. You received payment, Dana said. I needed out, he mumbled. I didn't want kids. Not with Sarah. And now? He looked at Ellie, then away. I want a lawyer. The snow had finally melted. Winter Hollow, once frozen and breathless under months of frost, was beginning to exhale. Pine needles shimmered with morning dew, and birdsong broke the silence Jack had once known too well. Spring had come not with the gentle flutter of petals, but with something stronger, a second chance. The cabin remained humble, timber worn by years and storms, the tin roof still bearing scars from the night it nearly caved in. But now, laughter echoed through its halls. Ellie's voice sang softly as she rocked Ben and Lila near the fire, their small chests rising steadily, their fevers now only a memory. Bruno dozed nearby, muzzle on his paws, his fur thick and glossy under the sunlight pouring through the window. Jack stood outside, rake in hand, smoothing the earth where ice had hardened the soil for so long. His breath no longer formed fog in the air, and the heaviness in his chest, one that had lingered for years since war and loss, felt lighter. 2 weeks had passed since the courtroom victory. In that time, the county court had officially named him the legal guardian of Ellie, Ben, and Lila. The paperwork had been signed by Judge Avery Holt herself. Her final words echoed in his mind. "You may not have blood ties, Mr. Bennett, but what you've done, no parent could have done more." Jack hadn't cried then. But when Ellie climbed into his lap that evening and whispered, "Can I call you Dad if I want to?" something inside him cracked open and healed. Bruno's moment came days later, at the town's annual honor assembly. Winter Hollow didn't host grand parades, but the town hall had never been more alive. Families, veterans, and school children gathered as Officer Miles Grant pinned a silver medallion onto Bruno's collar. The engraved words read, "For loyalty beyond words." Ellie stood on stage beside Bruno, clapping with red cheeks and a proud grin. Her hair had grown longer, and the shadows in her eyes had softened. She wore a navy dress Celia had found at the thrift store, now neatly sewn at the seams. The little girl who had once shivered in silence now waved shyly to the crowd, hand gripping Jack's tightly. Celia Monroe sat in the front row, wearing a beige blouse and her old Army-issued boots. She had announced the reopening of her free clinic 2 days prior. The clinic, located in a small wing of the church, was now a sanctuary for families caught in silent wars. Women who had endured years of emotional abuse, children who flinched when a door slammed, even young fathers trying to do right but lost in the chaos of poverty, all would find help there. Celia had always been strong, tall, and lean, with dark brown skin and intelligent eyes that missed nothing. But in these weeks, she'd allowed herself to soften, to laugh. She called Ellie the fighter, and Lila my sleeping nurse, since the girl had a habit of waking when someone sneezed. Ben had become Bruno's shadow, crawling toward the dog any time he heard a bark. On the first clear morning of April, Ellie tugged on Jack's sleeve just after breakfast. "Can we plant something?" she asked. Jack arched a brow. "You're thinking of vegetables already?" She shook her head. "A tree, a little one. Mom always wanted to plant one, but there was never time." His voice caught slightly. "All right, kiddo, let's do it." Together they dug a small patch of land just a few feet from the porch. The ground was still stubborn, but the sun had done its work. Ellie pressed her palms into the dirt, giggling when worms wriggled away. Jack guided her fingers around the roots of a young pine sapling, one he had once set aside for firewood, but now saw with new meaning. They covered the roots with soil, then Ellie ran back inside. When she returned, she held a wooden plaque no bigger than her hand. She had written it in blocky letters with her school marker. "For Mom and the soldier who didn't turn away." Jack swallowed hard. He stood still, one hand on her shoulder, the other brushing a tear from his cheek before she could see. Bruno sat beside them, ears forward, watching. That evening, with dinner finished and the children asleep, Jack stepped out onto the porch. The sky was a pale indigo, stars twinkling shyly behind drifting clouds. The pine sapling swayed gently in the breeze. Celia joined him, 2 mugs of tea in hand. "You gonna keep the beard?" she teased. Jack grinned. "I might. Seems to scare off door-to-door salesmen." They stood in silence for a while. Then she said quietly, "You've built something here, Jack. I hope you see it." "I didn't build it," he said, voice thick. "They came to me. I just didn't walk away." Celia nudged him. "And that's the part most people don't do." He looked at her, then back at the cabin, glowing softly in the dark. A family not made by blood, but by bravery. A dog once trained for battle, now guarding the warmth of home. A girl who once whispered in fear, now planting trees for the future. And for the first time in years, Jack let himself believe he had not survived by accident, but by purpose. The tree, he knew, would grow slowly, but it would grow. Seasons would pass, storms, winds, more winters, but this one, it would stay. Sometimes the miracle we pray for doesn't come as thunder from the sky. It walks on 4 legs or knocks softly at our door in the middle of a snowy night. Jack wasn't looking for redemption. Ellie wasn't looking for a soldier. But love found them both in the most unexpected place. Maybe that's how God works. Not always loud, but always on time. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who still believes in second chances. Comment below if you've ever been saved by love in unexpected ways. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that remind us. Even in the coldest winters, faith can plant the seeds of something beautiful. May God bless you and everyone still waiting for their miracle.